My name is Rhea Sutton, and I am 31 years old. For 7 Christmases in a row, my parents dropped me at my grandmother's farmhouse in Vermont on the 23rd of December and picked me up on January 2nd. 7 years. 7 times I watched their car disappear down that road, while my brother pressed his face to the back window and fogged it with his breath. 7 sets of Christmas lights I strung with my grandmother instead of my parents. The morning I got my high school diploma, my car was already packed. By 3 in the morning I was crossing into North Carolina with the windows down, and nobody in the world knew which direction I'd gone. It took my parents 3 years to find me, and when my mother finally walked through the door of my studio, standing there in her good wool coat, looking at everything I'd built with her slow, traveling eyes, the very first thing she said told me she hadn't driven 9 hours to apologize. She'd driven 9 hours to collect something she thought still belonged to her. Welcome back to Peaceful Drama Stories, where the people who kept quiet the longest finally get the loudest chapters. If stories about family, belonging, and building something entirely your own speak to you, drop a comment and subscribe. Now let me take you back to the winter I turned 9, and the red mittens that started everything. The mittens appeared on my bed the week before Christmas break. Hand-knit, my grandmother's work, cable-stitched, and a size too big for me then. My mother set them down like a consolation prize and said, "Gran made these special for you, isn't that sweet?" I was 9. Mittens meant snow. And snow meant the ski resort in Colorado, because that's where my parents had taken my brother the year before. I put the mittens on and spread my fingers and waited for someone to tell me I was coming too. Instead, on the 23rd of December, we drove 4 hours north to Briar Hollow, Vermont, where my grandmother lived in a white farmhouse at the end of a dirt road the county forgot to pave. My parents stayed for lunch. My father carried my duffel up the porch steps. My mother knelt to my eye level the way she always did for the hard news, and said the sentence that would become the architecture of my childhood. Strong girls find their footing wherever they're planted. She kissed my forehead, got in the car, and drove south toward the airport with my brother in the back seat. I stood on that porch and found my footing. I was very good at finding it. Someone should have worried about how good I was. Here's the detail that took me 20 years to say out loud. The ski trip to Colorado was booked in October. The mittens were ordered in November. Nobody mentioned a word to me until December, which means the plan to leave me behind existed for 2 full months, before anyone thought I deserved a sentence about it. When people ask me now why I left the way I left, carefully, silently, with the logistics arranged weeks in advance, I tell them the honest answer. I learned the method from my mother. She just never expected the student to use it on her. Every winter after that had the same shape. The 23rd of December. The duffel bag, the 4-hour drive, the car pulling away toward whichever airport served whichever destination they'd chosen. Then sometime in late January, a postcard would arrive addressed to me in my mother's looping, cheerful handwriting. Aspen the 1st year. Cancun the 2nd. Hawaii the 4th. 7 years, 7 cards, and every single one ended the same way. Wish you were here, with the exclamation point that always made it feel more like an advertisement than an apology. My grandmother would hand the card over without comment, and I would read it the way I read cereal boxes, over and over, looking for something that wasn't there. It took me 4 years to notice what was missing. Not once did a card say "We miss you." Not once did one say "Next year you're coming." The message was never a letter. It was a caption. Look at the family on vacation. In January, my teachers assigned the essay every kid writes. What I did over winter break. I wrote about Vermont and got a B+, and my mother stuck it on the refrigerator next to a photo of my brother on a ski lift. 2 different winters, same magnet. I stopped writing those essays honestly around year 4. Nobody noticed, which told me more about my household than the postcards ever had. To be fair to my parents, and I have spent a significant amount of my adult life learning exactly how much fairness I owe them, and not 1 degree more. The story didn't begin with a duffel bag. It began with a Saturday morning in October when I was 6, and my brother, who was 9, hit a ball so far out of left field that 3 coaches and a scout from the Travel League were standing in our driveway within a week. He was that kind of athlete, the kind that doesn't happen twice in a town like ours. My parents came alive around it, the way plants come alive in sunlight. They spent the next decade rotating their entire existence around his schedule: tournaments in Georgia, championships in Arizona, showcases in California. My brother needed them courtside and rinkside and bleacher side, and they were there, every single time. I understand it. I have understood it for years. When something extraordinary lands in your house, you organize around it. My parents came out of those early tournament years with a mission statement burned into their DNA: be there for him, and attached to it a belief about me that calcified quietly and completely. Rhea is steady. Rhea is capable. Rhea doesn't need the same things. Here is the part I want you to sit with for a moment. The Christmases alone didn't start during tournament season. They started 2 full years after my brother's travel league schedule had settled into something manageable. The emergency passed. The system it built did not. Nobody ever looked at the girl standing on a farmhouse porch in Vermont and asked whether the triage was still necessary. The winter I was 11, I made my case. The destination was Cancun, and I wanted to go badly enough that my chest ached when I thought about it. I planned it the way I planned everything, in advance, with a list. I wrote down 4 reasons I should come. I practiced them in the bathroom mirror. I stood in the kitchen with my handwritten list while my mother folded laundry and my father watched the weather report. My mother set down a shirt. She knelt to my eye level, her voice going soft as flannel. This trip is planned around your brother's recruiting showcase, sweetheart. You understand. And then, when my face did something I couldn't control, she tucked my hair back and finished with the family creed. Strong girls find their footing wherever they're planted. My father said nothing. That was his instrument, the whole orchestra of nothing. I went to my room and I found my footing. And around 9 that night, I heard the sound of a zipper. I came to the top of the stairs and looked down into the hallway. My duffel bag was already packed and standing by the front door. I hadn't touched it. Someone had answered my speech hours before I ever gave it. I never asked to come on a trip again. That duffel bag at the bottom of the stairs was the answer for every year I had left. Now, if this were a simpler story, the winters in Vermont would have been the punishment. They weren't. That is the complicated mercy at the center of my childhood, and I want to be accurate about it because accuracy is the only thing I've ever fully trusted. My grandmother's farmhouse was the one place on earth where I was not the steady one, the capable one, the one who didn't need anything. I was just Rhea. Gran May, that's what I called her, was my father's mother. Widowed when was Wokarter, no particular interest in being anyone's afterthought. She had run a pottery studio out of her barn for 30 years, and she put me to work the first week I stayed with her. Real clay, real kiln, real orders taped above the wheel. She taught me to center a mound of clay the winter I was 10, standing behind me with her hands over mine, and when I collapsed it, she made me diagnose why. Too much pressure on the wrong side. Then we started again. At her table, I was asked questions, and my answers mattered. What we threw, what we fired, what we baked on Sundays from her index. I once heard her introduce me to a neighbor as my girl who comes every Christmas, and I spent the rest of that day walking 2 inches taller. One evening when I was 12, she looked at me across a cooling rack of shortbread and said, "In this kitchen, you're not anybody's easy option. You're just Rhea." Then she seemed to reach toward something else and stopped herself. She got up and checked the oven instead. I learned eventually what lived on the other side of those unfinished sentences. That same winter, I came downstairs late for water and found my grandmother at the kitchen table with the phone pressed to her ear and a voice I had never heard from her. Sharp, almost pleading. "Then let her stay through the school year, Carol. She'd have her own room." I'll cover everything. I've already called the school. Carol is my mother. There was silence on the line, then my grandmother again, and her voice had gone cold and flat. That's not a reason, that's an excuse. Another silence. Appearance isn't a reason. One final pause, and then she said very quietly, "You can't loan a child out and call it care." She must have heard me because she turned, and her whole face shifted in half a second back into grandmother. She said the school year was lonely in Vermont anyway, all mud and slush, and walked me back up to bed with her hand warm between my shoulder blades. We never spoke about it. I was 12. I understood only the temperature of the thing, that something had been offered and refused, and that the refusal was something my grandmother found unforgivable. I filed it the way children file things that don't have a folder yet. It would take nearly 20 years before I understood everything she had actually proposed that night, and what my mother said to turn it down, and the exact words my mother used to do it. Something changes in a girl the year she stops asking. My parents read it as maturity. My mother repeated the word self-sufficient at dinner parties, like a ribbon she'd won at a fair. What it actually was arithmetic. At 15, I opened a spiral notebook and wrote a date on the first page. June, 3 years away. The month I would have a diploma and be 18. Under it, I started a list that was really a countdown. I calculated what a room rented for in cities I'd looked up at the library, what a used car cost, what a person could save working weekends if she was careful and inconspicuous. And inconspicuous was the language I was born fluent in. I waited tables at the diner on Mill Road all through junior year and taped every folded bill into an envelope inside my closet behind the winter coats. I wrote one word on the envelope: later. By graduation, the envelope had become a shoebox, and the shoebox held $4,200, and not one person in my house had asked what I was saving for. They assumed state school. Let them. I had already made my real plan. I'd found a 2-year culinary arts program at a community college in Asheville, North Carolina, far enough away that nobody would drive there on a whim, cheap enough to survive on diner wages, and it had a ceramics elective I had circled 3 times in red pen. I applied with a return address that belonged to my friend Josie, whose parents never checked the mail. I told no one, not even Gran. Leaving her out was the only part of the plan that felt like swallowing something sharp. But I knew my mother, and I knew that after I disappeared, every person who cared about me would be sat down in that kitchen and questioned in that soft, reasonable voice. The only way to protect my grandmother from being used as a tool was to make sure she had nothing to say. In April, a letter arrived at Josie's house. I had been accepted. A small merit award covered half of first semester. I read it in Josie's car in the school parking lot and sat with my hands in my lap for a long time, because I had been bracing for rejection so hard that acceptance felt like being caught mid-fall by something solid. Graduation was a Saturday afternoon in June on the football field. I was up before 5 that morning. By the time the ceremony started, my car was packed and sitting in the school lot, with the shoebox of cash under the spare tire, and tucked beside it, a pair of red mittens I had quietly taken from a hook in Gran's mudroom the previous Christmas. Don't ask me why I took them. At 18, I told myself they were evidence. It took me years to admit they were a wound I wasn't done pressing. My parents came to graduation. I want to be accurate about that. They sat, and 30 minutes in, during the D's, my mother leaned over and whispered that they needed to slip out early because my brother had his college signing ceremony that afternoon and the drive was 2 hours. She squeezed my hand. "We'll celebrate tonight," she said. When they called Rhea Marie Sutton, I walked across a stage and shook a hand and looked out at 2 empty chairs with programs folded on the seats. And here is the thing. It didn't hurt the way I expected. It felt like a receipt. The universe printing one last record of exactly what I had been to them, so I could leave with the math complete. That night I ate dinner with them. Said I was tired, went upstairs. At 3 in the morning I left. I placed a note on the kitchen counter weighted by the sugar canister so it wouldn't be mistaken for junk mail. I had rewritten it 14 times over the winter. The final version said, "I'm safe, I'm an adult. Please don't look." I signed it with the initial my grandmother always used when she shortened my name. Then I backed down the driveway with my headlights off and didn't turn them on until I reached the main road. 800 miles. I stopped twice in rest areas, seat tilted back, shoebox riding under the spare, like a second heartbeat. Somewhere in Tennessee, I pulled over at a gas station and swapped my phone SIM for a prepaid card I'd bought with cash in March. My old number, the one in my mother's contacts, died in a trash can outside Knoxville. On the afternoon of the second day, I came over a rise on the highway, and Asheville opened up in the valley. Below me, the Blue Ridge wrapping it on 3 sides. And I had to hold the wheel steady because my hands wanted to shake, and I didn't have the attention to let them. I was 18 years old with everything I owned in a hatchback, and nobody on earth knew which state I was in. You'd think that would feel like falling. It felt like finally getting enough air. 2 weeks later, a housing officer from the college knocked on my dorm door to confirm a welfare check had been requested from Ohio. She was efficient and kind. She asked me to confirm my enrollment, confirm I was there of my own choice, and sign form. Then she explained, in the tone of someone who had done this before, that my family would be notified I was located and safe, and would not be told where. That was my right as an adult. Before I changed numbers for good, one voicemail had come through from my mother. I listened to it once. "Rhea, this is very dramatic, honey. We raised you to be stronger then." I deleted it at the word stronger, and the room went quiet. It is the only time in my life I ever got to finish that sentence for her. If you've ever been the one who wasn't in the family photo, not because you weren't home, but because the photo just didn't think to include you, I want you to know I see you. Tell me in the comments what you were doing the winter your family forgot to ask if you wanted to come. I read everyone. And if you're new here, subscribe, because what happened when they finally found me is the part this whole story has been building toward. I built something real in Asheville, and I want to put that on record before I go further. The culinary program was hard, and I was good at it in the particular way a person is good at something when they had a grandmother who took them seriously. I found a ceramic studio downtown that let students rent wheel time for $12 an hour. And within a year, I was teaching Saturday workshops there in exchange for free studio access. By the time I finished the program, I had a following modest enough to be sustainable and real enough to matter. Then the studio owner, a woman named Marta, 62, with clay permanently in the lines of her hands, told me she was thinking about adding a café component. She'd watched me bake for workshop participants for 18 months. She asked if I wanted to be her partner. I went home that night and taped a piece of graph paper to the inside of my closet door. At the top, I wrote the buy-in number she needed from me. Below it, what I had. The gap between them became my religion for the next 2 years. Tips, overtime, no streaming subscriptions, boots resold twice before I replaced them. The number climbed in pencil, slowly and then faster, and then slowly again. Meanwhile, I had never fully unpacked the red mittens. They sat in the bottom drawer of my dresser like something I hadn't decided the fate of yet. Some nights I'd open the drawer and look at them and then close it again without touching them. Some wounds you keep in a drawer because you're not ready to either display them or bury them. The article was Marta's idea, and I want that on the record. A writer from a regional magazine was doing a feature on Asheville's maker economy, and Marta volunteered me without asking first. She wanted the baker-ceramicist angle. She wanted my name and a photo by the kilns. I stood in the studio while every alarm I owned went off at once, and I did the cost-benefit calculation I'd learned to do in seconds. The business needed to be findable. "You cannot run a cafe on a witness protection heart." I said yes. My name appeared in print for the first time in my adult life. Rhea Sutton, co-owner of Marta & Co., ceramic artist and baker. I stared at it for a long time. 3 years of being legally unfindable, and there I was, above the fold of a magazine that a second cousin of my mother's would encounter 11 days after the piece went online. The comment she left under the digital version said simply, "Is this Carol's daughter?" On a Tuesday in March, the bell above the studio door rang while I was centering clay for a commission order. I said we'd be right with you before I looked up. My mother was standing in the middle of my studio. 3 years, 900 miles. And there she was in her good wool coat, hair shorter and grayer than the version I'd been arguing with in my head, looking around the room with that slow, proprietary sweep I knew so well. Behind her, holding the doorframe the way he always held doorframes, was my father. He looked smaller. His right hand down at his side was trembling. A fine, constant shiver I clocked and filed before my thoughts had even assembled into words. Nobody moved. The wheel hummed. My mother finished her survey of the room. She looked at me, at my apron, my clay-covered hands, the framed article on the wall, the whole standing, operational, self-sufficient life I had built without them, and she pressed her lips together in that way that always preceded her church smile, and she said it. "So this is what you gave your family up for." I knew in that instant they hadn't come 9 hours to apologize. They'd come 9 hours for a pickup. I washed my hands. I made them coffee. I want you to understand why, because it wasn't weakness. A woman who owns the ground she's standing on can afford to pour coffee on it. They sat at the counter while my mother delivered the authorized version of my childhood, and I listened the way you listen to a tour guide describing a city you actually lived in. In her version, I had loved visiting Gran every Christmas. In her version, my independence was a gift they'd given me on purpose, and look how beautifully it had turned out. Look at this studio. Look at this life. In her version, my disappearance had been a phase, a cruelty she had borne with remarkable patience, and we needn't relitigate it now that I'd gotten it out of my system. Here is what frightened me, genuinely. She wasn't lying. You can hear when someone is lying. My mother believed every syllable, the way you believe a road you've driven for 20 years without ever questioning where it goes. My father said almost nothing. His finger tapped the counter in an uneven rhythm he didn't seem aware of. Twice I caught him looking at the framed article with an expression I had no file for. Then my mother got to the business of the trip. My father had been diagnosed with a heart condition the previous spring. Early, stage, managed, but requiring consistent monitoring and lifestyle adjustments he was not making on his own. She delivered this the way she delivered weather reports. Factual, brisk, as though the information belonged to her. Then she let the silence do a lap around the room. "Your brother has his hands full," she said. "The baby is only 8 months old, and his career—" She reached across my counter and took my wrist. The same grip as graduation, and she said the sentence she had driven 9 hours to deliver. "You've always been the steady one, Rhea. It's time to come home." I looked at her hand on my wrist. I felt the weight of it, and what it weighed was the weight of a luggage tag. 3 years, 900 miles, a legal form signed in a college housing office, a business with my name on the window, and the first complete sentence my mother had for me was a job assignment. The vacancy for the steady one had reopened. I was being recalled to fill it. I took my wrist back gently, the way you take a sharp thing from someone who doesn't know they're holding it. I said no. Not a speech, not a manifesto, just that one word standing alone in the space where she expected an argument. I told them the lunch hour was starting, and they should try the shortbread before the drive back. My mother's face went through its full repertoire and settled on Wounded Dignity, her home parish. On the sidewalk through the studio glass, I watched her redirect my father toward the rental car. He looked back once. I didn't wave, neither did he. And somehow, that was the most honest exchange the three of us had managed all morning. That evening my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. My brother. My mother had taken my number from behind the counter during the visit. I almost let it go to voicemail. I'm glad I didn't. He didn't open with the family script. His first question was quiet and off balance. Was it true you hated going to Gran's every year? I said I never hated Gran. I hated what being sent there meant. And I told him what it meant. All of it. The duffel bag, standing packed by the door before I'd said a word. The postcards. The essay about Vermont that sat on the refrigerator next to the photo of him on a ski lift. The night I heard Gran on the phone asking to keep me through the school year. The line went so quiet I checked my screen. Then my brother said, in a voice I hadn't heard from him since we were children, "She told me you chose to go, that you preferred it there. I believed that my whole life." A pause. Then, "I found something when I helped them move last year. In a box of old mail, a letter Rhea. Gran's handwriting, dated December when you were 12. He stopped. Mom had never opened it. The envelope was still sealed. I opened it. He read it to me from a photo on his phone. My grandmother had written 3 pages, longhand, proposing to enroll me in the Briar Hollow School District for a full year, offering to cover every expense, explaining she had already spoken with the principal. She had phrased it carefully, the way a woman phrases something she knows will be refused and is asking anyway. She had written, "I am only asking you to let her be somewhere. She is someone's first thought, not their last." The letter had never been answered. It had been filed in a box labeled Old Mail and moved through 3 houses in 18 years until my brother opened it. His voice cracked on the last of it. He didn't ask me to come home and take care of anyone. He asked one thing only. Don't do the disappearing thing again, not to me. After we hung up, I sat for a long time looking at the drawer where the red mittens lived. Here is the part nobody warns you about. Walking away is one decision. Staying gone is a decision you make again every single morning. If you've ever had to choose between your own peace and your family's version of who you're supposed to be, comment "I chose me" below, so the next person scrolling at midnight knows she's not doing it alone. I called Gran the next night. The moment she heard my voice, she understood something had shifted, because our entire correspondence up to that point had been one wordless postcard a year, a picture of the Asheville Mountains, a tiny sketch of a pot wheel on the back. Our own version of a language. "They found you," she said. It wasn't a question. I told her about the coffee, the counter, the recall notice. She was quiet for a moment. Then my grandmother, who had spent 20 years stopping herself at the edge of sentences, finally walked to the edge and stepped off. "The letter," she said. "Your brother told me he called you." A pause. "I should have gotten in the car. I should have come down there myself." She let that sit. Then, "Come for Thanksgiving, not for them. So you stop wondering who you'd be in a room full of people who actually wanted you there." I didn't sleep well for 3 nights. And I'll be honest with you, the debate wasn't mostly about my parents. It was mostly about the number on the graph paper. I was still $8,000 short. Going back to Ohio, even briefly, wasn't just a plane ticket. It was a crack in the hull of everything I'd built, and I knew myself well enough to know what that crack could become if I let it. The steady one would do what the steady one always does: absorb, accommodate, disappear in place. Which is the one kind of disappearing I hadn't tried yet. On the 4th morning, I did the thing I had never once done in my adult life. I asked for help. Out loud, with the whole truth attached. I sat Marta down at the workbench before we opened and told her everything. The winters in Vermont, the duffel bag, the car at 3 in the morning, my father's heart, the number on the graph paper, what I was afraid going back might cost me in money and in nerve. She listened all the way out, arms crossed. Then she said, "The studio's been here, Sixers. It can wait 3 weeks." She paused. "Can you?" I booked the flight that afternoon. And then, I did something I couldn't entirely explain. I got the red mittens out of the bottom drawer and packed them in my carry-on. If I was walking back into that house, I was walking in with the thing they'd taught me on. Some evidence you carry. Some evidence carries you. Gran drove down from Vermont and met me at the Columbus airport. The sight of her in arrivals, gray now, scanning heads the way she used to scan the barn door for me when I was small, undid more of my composure than the whole flight had. We got a motel by the highway. I want that detail noted. 2 grown women with family 20 minutes away, and we got a motel. Because a boundary you can't walk out of isn't a boundary, it's a holding room. Thanksgiving was at my brother's house, which my mother had effectively taken over the way she took over every room she entered. 14 for dinner. His wife had strung lights in the dining room. Their daughter, 8 months old, barely sitting up, was in a bouncy seat near the window and regarded the whole gathering with the impartial, unfocused attention of someone who has not yet decided to have opinions. I came with Gran, and I came carrying a ceramic dish I had made myself, painted with a pine branch border, filled with a tart I'd baked the night before at the motel kitchenette. The dish was not just a dish, it was a resume. My mother met me at the door with the church smile at full wattage. She took both my hands, looked me over in one sweep, and said, "There she is. Doesn't she look thin?" My father stood behind her and gave me a look that held more words than he had spoken in my presence in years. My brother was at the counter slicing bread. He looked at me in a way that was entirely new. The way a person looks when they've been given information that rearranges the furniture. His wife brought me a glass of water and held my gaze for just a moment and nodded slightly, and I understood she knew. It went fine, mostly. Side dishes and safe topics, and my grandmother staying close to my shoulder. Then the turkey came out, and my mother stood and tapped her glass. "Before we eat," she said, "I have an announcement." She laid it out in the same 2-movement structure she used for everything. The minor key, my father's heart condition, the medications, the need for consistent care, the concern they'd all been carrying. The table did what tables do. The soft sounds, the hands pressed to chests. My father studied his fork. Then the major key. My mother lifted her chin and delivered the part she'd driven 9 hours to set up. "But here's what I'm so grateful for. Rhea has agreed to come home and be there for her father." She let it settle, then she added the garnish. "She's always been the steady one." The room responded exactly as she had catered it to. Someone said of course she did. One of her friends pressed a hand to her collarbone, and my mother received it all with a slow, humble nod. While the sentence about my life, a sentence that had never once been posed to me as a question, draped itself across my shoulders like something I was supposed to carry without being asked. I looked around that table at 14 faces glowing in the direction of a decision that was not mine. The déjà vu was so precise it was almost physical. A trip planned in October. A bag by the door in November. A daughter informed in December. 15 years later, and the machine had never once considered that the part might have opinions about being cast. Into the soft applause, my niece knocked a rattle off her tray. My sister-in-law picked it up, and in the process my niece got a clear look at me across the room and stared. The absolute, uncomplicated stare of an 8-month-old who has no idea who I am and sees no reason yet to pretend otherwise. That stare was the true state of our family. The steady one was a stranger to the newest member of it. My brother stared at his plate. My father looked up at me. I placed my napkin beside my dish. I stood. Here is what I had learned in 3 years of run a small business. You never try to outshout a room. You lower your voice until the room has to come to you. I stood until the last murmur faded in its own, and then I spoke at the volume you'd use to read a bedtime story. "Mom." Just that word. She looked at me. I never agreed to that. The room rearranged itself. I kept my sentences short and put them down like tiles, one at a time. "I'm not moving back." Before anyone could begin the negotiation. But nobody at this table is going to say I left my father without a plan. So here is what is going to happen. I told them I had spent the previous 2 weeks on the phone with the cardiac care program at the hospital. My father's own cardiologist had been recommending for a year. 3 monitoring appointments per week, medication management, the lifestyle coaching his doctor had prescribed, and he had been ignoring. The intake appointment was already scheduled. It started Monday. Then I looked at my brother. "The cost is shared," I said, "between you and me. Equally. I emailed you the breakdown last night. I'd like an answer by end of week. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than the one before. My brother didn't look at my mother. He looked at me. I'll call you tomorrow, he said, and the way he said it, flat and final, told me he meant it. My mother's face moved through its repertoire. Then she tried the old exit, the one that had always worked before. After everything this family has given you. You gave me a duffel bag, I said, every December, and a postcard after. The table leaned in. The sentence finished detonating quietly, and nobody's fork moved. I watched my mother's friend look at my mother, and I watched the look not bounce back. That was new. My mother opened her mouth. Then she tried her final resort, the one she'd been saving. If you walk out of this house. That door stopped fitting me when I was 9, I said. And? I knew before I'd finished the sentence exactly what story she would tell by morning. The daughter who abandoned her sick father at Thanksgiving. I paid for that story anyway, because some costs are worth it, and I had done the math. But before I reached for my coat, my father pushed back his chair. He gripped the table edge and stood, tremor running through his arms, and the room held its breath, the way rooms hold their breath when the quietest person stands up. He reached into the pocket of his cardigan and took out a folded piece of paper. He held it out to me. I opened it. It was a printout, a screenshot of the Etsy listing for my ceramic bowls, dated 14 months ago, before the magazine article, before the second cousin's comment, before any of this. He had found me first, on his own, and said nothing. Below the screenshot, in his handwriting, unsteady at the tails now, I found you. I should have come then. I'm sorry I didn't. I stood at that table, holding 14 months of my father having known and staying quiet. It didn't fix anything. He had found me and folded the knowledge into his cardigan pocket instead of into action. But here is what it also was. Proof that once, before the story got rewritten, someone in that house had actually looked. I folded the paper back the way he folds things and put it in my coat pocket. Then, into the quiet of that table, my mother did something I had never witnessed from her in my entire life. She broke. Not into tears. She doesn't do tears in front of company. She broke off script, which for her is something far more exposed than weeping. She was still holding the table edge. Her voice came out in a register I didn't recognize. I was 9 years old when my father took my sister on the trips, she said, to no one in particular. To everyone, every Christmas, every summer. He said I was the one who could manage. He never asked. She stopped herself, then continued past the stop anyway. Nobody ever asked me either. The table turned to her. There it was. The whole machine, the duffel bag, the postcards, the steady one. Wasn't something she had invented. It was something she had been handed, the way you're handed furniture that belonged to someone before you. And you arrange your whole house around it without ever asking where it came from. She had been the girl at the window watching the car pull away, and she had survived it by deciding that being unasked was proof of strength. And she had given that proof to her daughter with both hands, the only way she knew to say you are like me. For one long moment I saw her at 9 years old, at a table too big for her, managing, and I felt the nearness of understanding her in a way that could have been love, if things had arranged themselves differently. Gran spoke from the end of the table, very quietly, across 50 years of sisterhood. Carol, she's not you, let her go. My mother looked at me. I did the only thing left that was both true and kind at the same time. I know, Mom, I said. Nobody asked you either. That's exactly why I'm ending it. So nobody at this table ever has to be the one nobody thought to ask. They just get to belong. She didn't answer. She sat down, very straight, looking at the center of the tablecloth. Gran got our coats. On the porch. The exact boards where I had stood at 9 years old watching headlights disappear. I finished the sentence I had been writing since winter. It took them 3 years to find me. It took me 7 Christmases to understand that I'd been waiting to be found since I was old enough to stand on a porch and not make a fuss. Here is the ledger 1 year on, because I promised you accuracy and not a bow. My father's cardiac program started that Monday. His care coordinator texts him weekly check-ins, and he responds in one-word answers that are somehow always exactly sufficient. He flew out to Asheville in March. First plane he'd boarded in 4 years, and I taught him to center clay on a wheel. His hands shook the whole time. The bowl came out lopsided. We fired it anyway, and it sits on the windowsill above my wheel, where I can see it every morning. My brother sends his half of the care costs on the first of every month without being reminded. We have actually talked, 7 times since Thanksgiving. He is making up for lost ground in the only currency available. Presence, showing up, following through. I am letting him. My mother sent a Christmas card in January, plain white, no letter, no explanation. Signed, Mom. Not love, not sorry, just the title she isn't ready to set down. Some doors don't slam in this life, some just settle closed and stay that way, holding the air on both sides. Marta and I signed the partnership papers in April. She adjusted the terms herself when the numbers didn't fully align, extended the repayment timeline, said without ceremony, "A business with good bones can carry a lien. That's what bones are for." The sign on the studio window now reads Marta & Co., with a second line in smaller letters below it. R. Sutton, partner. I asked for small. Small is enough. Smalls is entirely mine. The red mittens came out of the drawer last month. I put them on the shelf above the kiln, where Gran's hands can see them from across the room. Gran herself is coming for Thanksgiving this year. I'm putting her at the head of the table. A long one we'll build by pushing every work table in the studio end to end, because every place that calls itself a home should seat its real queen at the top of it. I already know what I'll put at her place setting. A picture of the Asheville Mountains on the front, and on the back, in my handwriting, the old familiar line and its exclamation point. Wish you were here. Except this time when she reads it, she'll already be sitting in the room. And that's the whole difference. The one it took me 22 years, and 7 Christmases, and 900 miles to understand. Family isn't the people who send the cards from somewhere you weren't invited. It's the ones who are already at the table when you look up. Who never needed to write, "Wish you were here," because they never let you be the one who was missing. That's my story. If it reminded you of a winter you spent being someone's easy option, tell me in the comments. I read everyone. Share this with someone who needs permission to finally put down the duffel bag. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.